Donald Trump's national security advisor is in Turkey, whilst his top diplomat is touring Middle East capitals. Both are on a mission to reassure allies after the US president's decision to withdraw his troops from Syria. Now, whilst he's in Ankara, National Security Advisor John Bolton is seeking to get guarantees that Turkey won't target America's Kurdish allies in northern Syria when the US leaves. And it seems that hasn't gone well with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who says his country will not compromise on Kurdish fighters it regards as terrorists. He's also criticised the mixed messages that are coming from the Trump administration about its Syria plans. The US Secretary of State, meanwhile, is beginning his Middle East tour in Jordan. Mike Pompeo will be visiting at least 8 capitals, including Cairo, Riyadh, Kuwait City and Doha. Well, shortly, we'll be going inside Syria and we'll be speaking to our correspondent Sinem Koseogl, who's in the northern town of Dadat. Stephanie Decker, meanwhile, is monitoring Mike Pompeo's movements in Amman. First, though, let's go to the Turkish capital, where we have Jamal El Shayyal standing by. So, Jamal, the US has been saying that talks in Turkey on the US withdrawal were productive, but Erdogan clearly not on the same page, and he's come out pretty strongly against Bolton.
Well, I mean, if you look at the language that was used by the spokesperson for the National Security Council when he commented on that meeting between John Bolton and Erdogan's top advisor, Ibrahim Kalin, it would actually indicate that they were anything but productive, or at least not as productive as he would like people to believe. Terminology like they've identified points that require further discussion is something that would usually be used diplo talk, meaning that they still haven't agreed on anything. And Erdogan, speaking to his AK Party members of parliament at the weekly session that is held here in Ankara, confirmed that. He essentially said that what is very peculiar is that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, told us that there will be a withdrawal. We've agreed with him based on that, based on the fact that Turkish military has been, as far as he said, effective in its combating of Daesh or ISIL fighters inside Syria, and that it would continue to target what he claimed were terrorist organizations. However, Erdogan said he finds it very peculiar how there are different elements within the United States government that are now giving mixed messages. He says he's not going to adhere to that as far as he's concerned. His country is facing national security threats in the form of these armed groups like the YPG inside Syria, and that the military has already geared up to take them on head on, and that he is waiting for the Americans to essentially live up to the promise made, or the commitments rather made by their president and their commander-in-chief, Donald Trump.
So, Jamal, it seems that there's very little likelihood then of any coordination, at least for the moment, between the US and Turkey when it comes to northern Syria.
Well, I mean, look, Erdogan said that the military is ready to go, and that he made it very clear that this is going to be an extension to the olive branch operation that had taken place in a bid to bring about what he said was stability. And he said it so much also in this latest op-ed that was published in the American media less than 24 hours ago. In terms of coordination, Laura, what you really need to look at on the ground is that these are still NATO's two largest militaries, the United States and Turkey. So internationally speaking, you're talking about the world's biggest superpower. Regionally speaking, you're talking about one of the biggest powers on the ground. There cannot be an operation of a large scale inside specific areas in Syria with the US military presence there without coordination. And that's what's maybe hampering things. The Turks want to go ahead. The Americans, through their president, have kind of given that initial green light. The Pentagon or other maybe elements within the United States are holding back. And what the Turks are saying is, well, to the Americans, how do you expect us to get Syria in order if you can't get your own government in order and come with a clear strategy? There's a lot of factors that also play in this with regards to, for example, regional players, Russia, Israel, Iran, and other countries as well. But as far as Turkey is concerned, they say that they have legitimate reason to enter, that they have a proven track record of hosting civilians who are under threat, be it the 3 million Syrian refugees who are inside, or even Kurdish refugees that have come from areas on the border there. and therefore their target, they say, is simply a military one against the Kurdish armed groups that they perceive to be a threat to their national security.
OK, Jamal, many thanks for that update there from Ankara. Well, let's take a look at the situation on the ground now and go to Sinem Koseogl, who's in northern Syria. So, Sinem, northern Syria is where the US troops are stationed and, of course, the Turkish, amongst others. Describe for us the military lay of the land there.
Well, yes, the exact location where we are is just by the town of Dadat. The town is right behind us, a few hundred meters away. And this is where the U.S. military and plus the Turkish military bases are located. You can see the Free Syrian Army checkpoints and the PYD, the Kurdish forces checkpoint right behind us. Where we are standing is just actually like a buffer zone between the FSA controlled area and the PYD controlled area. And you have the Turkish military and the US military who have been joint patrolling for the last couple of months. But after the US pullout decision was announced, we don't hear them joint patrolling frequently. I have to mention what I see around because where I'm standing is also named as a humanitarian corridor. This is what the PYD and the FSA have agreed on. The road right on my left side is spared for this, actually. And they are trying not to harass each other, both PYD and FSA. They are trying not to bother each other because the civilians are using this road as well as the humanitarian aid trucks. And you see the civilians getting in the van, getting out of their van on the FSA side, walking 50 meters between two speed bumps and getting on other vans on the PYD side. The civilians are going to Aleppo, and the ones from other parts of the Syria are coming to the FSA-controlled area here to Jarablus, and then going to Azaz and crossing the border to get inside Turkey. Of course, the uncertainty in terms of political conditions and international powers is also reflected in the field as well, because people do not know what's going to happen next. They say we have the checkpoints, we have our safe areas, but we want Syria to be united again. We want to get rid of these checkpoints. This is what some of the civilians have told us when we were talking to them before their trip from the FSA-controlled area to Aleppo. And on the other side, of course, there are Arabs in Manbij, which is right behind the town of Dadat behind me. And we have been speaking to Arabs who are living in Manbij. They are saying that despite the pressure by the YPG and PYD, they say that they prefer staying in Manbij because the life is easier there. The prices are lower there because PYD provides easier conditions with the support that it gets from the regime, like the foods, aid boxes, and etc. But of course, people here, they do not. When we ask to them whether they believe in the U.S. pullout decision, they say that they don't believe that U.S. is going to pull out fully, and they say U.S. is going to get whatever it wants and then pull out, but we don't know what they are going to leave for us. This is what the civilians have been telling us.
OK, Sinem, many thanks for joining us there from Dadat to give us an idea of what it looks like there in northern Syria. Well, joining us now from Istanbul is Matthew Bryza. He served on the US National Security Council under former President George W. Bush and is now a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia and Global Energy Centre. Thanks very much for being with us. I mean, this was never going to be an easy visit for John Bolton to Turkey, was it? But it seems he really hasn't got what he wanted at all, which is reassurances for the safety for the Syrian Kurdish fighters.
Yeah, and if that was his goal going in, that was a doomed mission from the very outset. I mean, you know, what he announced the other day in Israel is a complete reversal of what President Trump agreed with President Erdogan in their phone call back on December 14th. Back then, President Trump agreed that, as we know, the U.S. would withdraw from Syria, but would also take along with it the YPG, that the militia that Turkey does view as a terrorist organization that is affiliated with the PKK, which is recognized by the U.S. and the EU and Turkey as a terrorist organization. Now, Bolton is saying, no, the U.S. troops are going to stay, and Syria, in fact, until ISIS is defeated, and the U.S. is going to protect this enemy militia of Turkey. It should be clear to everybody, Turkey is not against the Kurds of Syria. Turkey is against this one particular militia, and the U.S. and Syria are way off track on that issue.
Absolutely, because, of course, we must remember this Kurdish group, the YPG, has been instrumental in working with the U.S. in its fight against ISIL. I mean, it's all a very messy business.
Yes, that's exactly right, Laura. The YPG has provided up to 50,000 troops, boots on the ground, to take the fight directly to ISIS. They fought valiantly and quite successfully. As a result, many, many American lives are saved. And the alternative to the YPG from Washington's perspective is someone else has to come in. Who's going to come in? Washington is not confident that the FSA, that your correspondent was just talking about, exists in sufficient numbers to replace the YPG. So it's a really difficult dilemma. But the bottom line is the United States is working with a terrorist organization, whether we officially call it that or not in Washington, rather than with its NATO ally. That's a mess that has to be sorted out.
I mean, Erdogan clearly feels that he can still appeal directly to Trump and bypass the rest of his administration. Officials like John Bolton, in this opinion piece that he wrote in the American newspapers, many say that he was appealing directly to Trump there. But do you think that he can get Trump back onto his page?
Well, Donald Trump flip-flops, every day on some policy. And as I was saying a moment ago, he has now allowed his policy to be completely reversed by the statement of National Security Advisor Bolton in Israel. I would presume that the president's closest national security aide, John Bolton, was speaking with President Trump's authorization. My guess is President Trump took his decision on December 14th to pull U.S. troops out of Syria impulsively. He heard something he liked from President Erdogan, that Turkey could take over stabilizing Syria and finishing the job against ISIS. And then Trump's advisor said, hang on, Mr. President, no, we don't believe they're capable of doing that. So I think this could all get resolved if President Trump, President Erdogan were able to come up with a new agreement, a longer-term stabilization of Syria, where Turkey plays a role, where Turkey's militia allies play a role, and where the United States is still there facilitating the final military operations against ISIS, and then together with Turkey working to stabilize the north, both in terms of security and politically in Syria. That's a lot to ask for. President Trump has not been in favor of a strong U.S. presence on the ground, even to reconstruct Syria. Russia's been pushing the international community to provide such assistance, and Washington has resisted. So I think President Trump still has a lot to think through, and we're in a moment of policy drift.
Absolutely, because in the meantime as well, we've got these two sides, Turkey and the US, appearing to be on a direct collision course, with the US troops still in there and determined to support the YPG, and Turkey's President Erdogan saying that he's made preparations for military action in Syria, in northern Syria.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Laura. I think President Erdogan was making that threat previously for two reasons. One, because it's sincere. I mean, Turkey doesn't want a corridor of what it views as terrorists on its border, but was also trying to elicit from President Trump precisely what President Trump said on December 14th, that the U.S. troops are going to pull out. And so now I think those U.S. troops are going to stay at the base your correspondent was talking about. Those observers will remain. I think there will probably be a resumption of the joint patrols of YPG and U.S. troops along the Turkish border, which are intended to deter Turkey. So now President Erdogan faces a very difficult choice. Does he maintain that pressure and risk a possible military clash with a NATO ally, or does he find some other way to work together with a reluctant President Trump on stabilizing Syria and being together on the ground for the long haul? You know, the end of President Erdogan's op-ed talks about just that, about how Turkey wants to take on a role to get it right after military operations and avoid the mistakes made in Iraq by the United States. So hopefully the U.S. and Turkey will work together on that, but now they're far apart.
Let's wait and see. Matthew Bryza, very good indeed to speak to you. Thanks for taking the time to join us there from Istanbul.